It's not fucking charged properly, is it? Nice, put his bottle of water down right in front of me tape recorder.
There we go. Can we still the raging disco? Is that working?
Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first session of the afternoon. Could I please, in a spirit of togetherness, and with the assurance that you will not be involved in any embarrassing acts of audience participation, please encourage you to come forward. Please, anybody. The gentleman at the back there. Don't go sit at the back, go sit down here. Make a friend. Come on, we're all in this together. Underground in Manchester on Saturday afternoon. Thank you very much. Now, my name's David Hepworth, and I know it's going to be amazing to you when you look at my boyish appearance and unlined countenance, but believe it or not, for the best part of 40 years, I was involved in the inky trade of writing about, publishing about music in all kinds of shapes and forms. I started off in the mid-70s freelancing for the NME and then freelance for Sounds, so you can tell how successful my career trajectory was. But it went better after that because I was desperately looking around for work, and I just needed absolutely anything, and I rang a very, very kind chap I know called Fred Deller, lovely bloke. And I said, Fred, do you know any work around at all? He said, well, Nick Logan's just left the NME, and he started this thing called Smash Hits, and he just needs anybody, okay? So I was anybody, yeah? The first rule of career, be available, yeah? Be willing, and I was that person. And so I joined Smash Hits, but then it just started. Smash Hits, I have to tell you, narrowly escaped being called what? Disco Fever. Yes? Disco Fever. At the time when Smash Hits was launched, John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John and the Bee Gees were, going mad all over the charts, and so it was an obvious title to give a magazine about hot music, but thankfully they didn't. Smash Hits also survived, having on the cover of its first issue, does anybody know who? Plastic Bertrand. Plastic Bertrand was Belgium's only contribution to popular music at the time. However, it somehow overcame that, and it went on to sell 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, nearly a million at one point. For every single sale, I personally claim the credit. That's how you get on in the media. And subsequently, we launched various other magazines on the back of that. We launched other teenage magazines. We launched music magazines like Q and Mojo. We launched film magazines like Empire, all kinds of things. And the magazine, the music magazine I was, sorry, there's a point about all this. I'm not just, blowing my own trumpet. The music magazine that I was most recently involved in launching, was probably nearly 10 years ago now, was a magazine called The Word. And The Word, we had to close about, we had a small independent company, we had to close it about, 18 months ago. And people come up to me and say to me, what a shame it had to close, And the reason was, it's, the manager of Spinal Tap says, we're not getting less popular, it's just our appeal is growing more selective. That was what was happening. and the fact that there was no advertising coming to the record business any longer because there was no record business, because there was no retail business, all kinds of boring reasons like that. And there were no younger readers coming into the market, which is one of the things you always rely on in magazines, is that new 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and teenagers or whatever are going to start reading music magazines. Well, they stopped, okay? They did something completely different. Nice to see you. But did I personally think it was a shame when Word closed that I no longer had to spend my time worrying about trying to get rock stars to submit to interviews, to arrange for them to have the photographer of their choice, to have the journalist of their choice, to try and get some new fresh angle out of this incredibly well-trodden area. No, I didn't miss it at all, actually. I went away from the wreckage of Word, many thousands of pounds lighter, but my heart was also light, because I didn't have to deal with that stuff any longer. And Alex Gold, who's a guy I work with on Word, he nagged me afterwards, a young guy, and he used to run the events that we used to do with the Word. And these times I was just bands playing in the pub across the road at Lexington. And he said, why don't we keep these going as a thing? We just do them occasionally. And I said, okay, let's do that. And so we started doing this, and we did them. But first of all, they were just musical. And then I said, Alex, I'm bored with just music. I think we should have some element of talk in these evenings. How about that? Is it possible that a load of people standing on a sticky floored pub in North London could possibly tolerate something other than a band just whacking through 50 minutes of songs that nobody'd ever heard before? So we decided to try this. I was very lucky. The first person I got to do it was Danny Baker. Because Danny had his book out, and so we had a band, and then we had me talking to Danny, and then we had a band. I was slightly worried about this at the outset. I thought, you're going to get a real dip in the energy here. The band is a certain kind of level. But no, it absolutely worked perfectly. People stood there and listened, absolutely rapt to Danny talk. Now, Danny's pretty good at talking. And subsequently, we've gone on and we've done other things similarly. We had Tracy Thorne looking at pictures of her childhood on a big screen and talking about them. We had David Ford, who I see is here this afternoon in a roadie capacity with our celebrity guest. David came and performed at one of the Word in Your Ear shows, and also demonstrated his extraordinary looping technology. And so, what struck me about these evenings was that they were doing a lot of things that people used to like in music magazines, but they were doing them live. They weren't relying on people reading about them. Because I don't think people can be bothered to read about anything, yeah? But they can have things explained to them, have things demonstrated to them, and they're perfectly happy with that. So, when they got in touch with me from Louder Than Words and said, would you be involved with this? Would you come up? I said, I've no desire to sit on a panel and talk about the death of rock journalism. I don't care. I have no interest whatsoever. But I'm very interested in other ways of cracking that particular nut. And I explained about Word in Your Ear. And so they said, well, why don't you come and do a Word in Your Ear here? And so that's what's going to happen in the next hour. You're all taking part in a live experiment. That's why it's really important you be close, okay? And they said, we're very fortunate to be able to get a wonderful performer who's in the Manchester area that evening, and we think we can get him here during the day. And he very kindly agreed to do it. So would you please welcome our special guest, the legend that is Hugh Cornwell. Take up your mic, is that working?
I think it's working, yeah. I don't know if it's working or not.
Now, Hugh, you and I have done a little bit of planning towards this, haven't we? But we spoke, we exchanged emails about it, and so we're not coming to this completely cold.
No. Well, we've never met before.
We've never met before.
Which is surprising, really, in a way, isn't it? All these years, I've been in the business a long time, you've been in the business a long time, we never actually met.
No, Ray, we've probably been there around about the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And so I had to think, have I met Hugh Cornwell before? And you had to think the same thing about me, because we're both immensely memorable, I suppose. And what I wanted to do, I'll just take off my watch here so that we can keep track of time. What I wanted to do was to talk about the kind of, I suppose what you might call the music media process, as I've experienced it from my side as a kind of doer, and as you've experienced from your side as a kind of victim or a provider.
It's better a provider than a victim.
Right.
Although I have been a victim occasionally, yeah.
And so what we decided to do, you and I, is that I've come up with 5 things, 5 home truths that I've always wanted to communicate to musicians about the music media process. And you come up with
5 things that I've never been really asked about.
Right. I see. Okay.
Did I misinterpret?
No, it's fine. You talk about whatever. You know, the idea is here you take the agenda in any direction you want.
Exactly.
Excuse me. I'm going to go first.
Great.
You forgive me. And my first point here on my bit of paper, I was actually going to put it on a flip chart over there, but that seems a bit over academic. Was that if I had my way, bands would never be interviewed ever again.
I think most of them would love that.
Do you seriously?
I do.
Shall I tell you why I think it? You can tell me why you think that.
Okay.
Because I realised about 20 years ago that I was sick of interviewing bands. Because bands are like political parties. That they are, on the surface, they're all accord in unanimity, yeah? And underneath, they're seething cauldron of resentments and jealousies that they never
and
talk
hierarchy.
And so, am I right?
Absolutely correct.
And when they're being interviewed together,
They all show up except probably 1 or maybe 2 people.
right.
I think.
Oh, well, go on. What, somebody doesn't show up to show that they're above the whole thing?
No, they're there, but they're all there, but then they deign to let somebody or 1 or 2 speak for. I mean, that was the case in our situation, where it was either me or John would, the bass player would take the floor in an interview, and Dave would sit there going like this, and Jet would occasionally go yeah, and throw something in, but most of the time he'd stay silent too. So, and I think there's a sort of I think when you're in a band, you after a while, I think people realise who's good for doing certain things, you know, and they rightly or wrongly agree to that.
So the PR picks out Hugh's good, we'll get him to do it.
Or with a certain just type of journalist or a subject, they go, oh, Hugh will be good for this, oh, John will be good for this, you know.
Right.
So,
yeah. But you must have had that experience, being interviewed with the Stranglers, where a journalist is asking about something, and you realise that the answers coming out are not candid at all. Is that fair to say?
the answers that we're providing them with. No, we were always as candid as we could be.
Right.
And it got us into a lot of trouble.
Well, give us an example.
Well, I mean, a journalist would come in and say, and these days they used to, this is a very simple example, first thing I think of is a journalist would come in and say, do you mind if I smoke? Because they were probably nervous. And we go, yes, we do actually. And they look at us as if they were, you know, very shocked that we weren't allowing them to smoke. And our way of looking at it was, well, if you're going to ask us, we're going to be candid and be truthful and say, well, actually, if you're going to give us the chance to say no, we'll say no. Not to be obstreperous, but if you're giving us the choice, we'd rather you don't smoke in this room. And then they look at us like, I can't believe you just disallowed me to smoke.
Oh, really? Those were the days. Those were the days when you never saw a rock journalist without a cigarette on at any point. You know?
Did it betray a nervous disposition?
Among the journalists?
Yeah,
Oh, definitely.
because it's crazy because they say have a cigarette and it'll calm you down, but that's the opposite of what it does. It speeds you up and that speeds your heart rate up. So I've never understood that.
So were you ever aware when being interviewed that the journalist was probably more nervous than you were?
Oh, a lot of the time.
Go on.
Probably about 90% of the time.
Really?
Mostly because there were 4 of us and only one of them.
Right. So just sheer numbers.
Sheer numbers, yeah. Yeah, I felt sorry for a lot of them.
You occasionally did unpleasant... There are all stories about the Stranglers doing unpleasant things to journalists. Is that the case?
Yeah, but if they were reported as being unpleasant, the journalists had a smile on their face. I mean, they really had a benign smile on their face, like we tied one to the gaffered one to the Eiffel Tower.
Oh!
We couldn't run up to the top because the last floor was because of the weather, it was blocked off. But took him up as far as we could go. And I mean, he didn't fight or anything. He accepted his fate. He was a French journalist, I think. I can't remember his name. And then another one, and then there was a very silly woman interviewing us when we were shooting a video in the desert. There is desert in Portugal, and it was for a song called Nuclear Device. We were in the middle of the desert in Portugal shooting this, and there was an explosive expert there who was setting up bigger and bigger explosions because it was called Nuclear Device. So we got this pyrotechnics going. He kept setting up bigger and bigger explosions, and after everyone went off, he went behind a bush and masturbated. Can you believe that? He got really excited about blowing things up. It's really remarkable. And so, and then this journalist came to interview us while we were shooting this, and she was really a complete idiot. And so we left her in the desert. Yeah, and she had to walk about 5 miles to get her.
It's all just part of the rough and tough.
Well, it was like, I mean, she really, I think she deserved it. She was a complete idiot. I mean, not in the sense of incompetence, but just really full of herself and just preconceived ideas.
But isn't it also, to be fair, isn't it a really kind of odd thing to do? The kind of rock interview always strikes me as really odd. You know, that somebody enters a room, you enter a room with a bunch of people you've never met before, who are very famous, and then you sit there and try and pretend to be casual, and everybody sort of pretends to be mates.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I agree with you that they're pointless. I mean, all musicians would rather get on, play their music, get on, write the songs, and be artistic and creative if they can be. And the idea of meeting someone they've never met before, and as you say, trying to enter into some sort of a rapport with them, and they've only got 20 minutes to do it, or at the most half an hour or whatever, the idea is ludicrous, and what on earth can they get out of it? And the worst thing is when a journalist would turn up and they'd sit down and they go, "Hello, Hugh," and they'd open the book, and if it was one-to-one, and they go, I was brought into this at the last minute because the bloke who was going to do it didn't turn up today or something. You think, great, you know. It said, so have you got a record coming out soon? And it's been out a month, you know, and so they're totally unprepared. And I don't. That's not very.
Right.
Not very nice to experience. So that's and you think this is a complete waste of time.
Why do I vaguely remember Ronnie Gurr being tied naked to a tree?
That was nothing to do with me, because that was with when John, the bass player, had a solo record released, and there was an incident there with Ronnie. Yeah, but I wasn't even there.
Ronnie Gurr still talks about it.
I'm sure he does. He probably gets rounds of drinks on it. Dines out on it.
Doesn't happen to you know, if you write about One Direction, that kind of thing, you know, doesn't come at all. Shall I get to my second point?
Yeah, sure.
Which is, which kind of ties in with what you've just been saying.
Yeah.
If I say one thing to rock bands, it would be this: if you don't want to do press,
don't do it.
Don't do it.
But then the record company would go mad.
Well, would they still?
I think they would. Because, well, I mean, I don't know about nowadays. I don't know how important it is to get press these days. I mean, the other means of communication. I mean, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, getting words in print was the way of getting the word across, awareness out about what you were doing. But these days, I'm not sure if that's very
because
relevant now.
You know, the Inkies and the Enemy and Melody Maker were hugely important in building the Stranglers.
Of course, yeah.
So you had to deal with them.
But in a way, even by their negativity. I mean, there were some journalists that were totally hated us, but you know, they say that if they're willing to spend a couple of paragraphs slagging you off, that's better, that's as good as them praising you.
But you always had a reputation for being good copy. Were you aware of that?
Because for that reason, I think.
Well, there was always a kind of crackle of danger about
always something
you
gonna
might
happen.
leave somebody tied naked to a tree.
Exactly.
So it concentrates the mind wonderfully, doesn't it? But you know, from my point of view, I feel I've interviewed loads of bands on the road when they're knackered.
Yeah.
They've arrived in town, you know, they feel wrung out. And they have to do 3 interviews before the show.
What can they contribute, you know, in that situation? It's not right, is it?
But then again, I feel you could try, boys. Am I?
But I think if they had the choice, I think 95% of musicians, if they had the choice, they'd say, I don't have to do press. Great. I really do. I think it's something it's a sort of a thing you sort of tolerate and you think, well, I have to do it. And there's nothing worse than going to somewhere and sitting in a room in a suite in a hotel rather like this, and then you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning, and there's a parade of journalists every half hour.
What's the most you've ever had in a day?
What, journalists?
Yes.
Journalists about 15, I think.
Really? Just in a line, one after the other?
Absolutely, 20 minutes each one. And but in a way, you're looking for the odd one that becomes interesting, you know.
Right.
And it does happen. Maybe 1 or 2 out of 15 would be interesting. I just wanted to ask you one thing that's come into my mind. Were you ever offered an interview with Stranglers and you turned it down, or you were busy or something? Because that would be interesting.
If the prospect of interviewing the Stranglers had come up, it's possible I might have found something junior to pass it on to. Because I didn't want to end up tied naked to a tree. But it's a serious issue, you know, because we were talking about Lou Reed when we were, you know, talking about the other week. It was just
we were indeed, and he had a very bad reputation with journalists, didn't he, apparently?
And you know, so the story goes, Lou Reed hated journalists. But my point is, nobody in the history of popular music paid more money to more PRs to get more journalists to talk to him than Lou Reed. Because every time he had a record out, the same, all the same people that brought sheets, that Inkies, whatever, and he'd snarl at them, and they'd go away and write about how it was frightening.
But occasionally you do get situations where you meet a journalist and you become mates. And we had someone called Barry Kane, who you probably remember. Barry, lovely man, and he and I became actually mates, you know, and he wasn't one of the enemy anymore, because he had the same outlook on life and communication, and we did some very funny things together. We once hitched from Paris to Brussels and did a photo, like a comic strip of what happened. I sat on the side of the road and hitched, and he had a cameraman and him, and they watched what happened. And I got a lift, and then they get a lift and follow me, and they go, "Can you follow that car, please?"
So he didn't feel compromised by this, because
did he feel compromised? Yeah. I don't think so. No, I think he loved the idea that he got closer than other people did.
Right.
And in the same way, I think he's got a book coming out, official biography of Malcolm McLaren,
right,
which is coming out soon. And it's the same way. He has got a way with him that he's got an ability to communicate with people on a different level, and you get access then, because then they go, "Oh, Barry's okay, yeah, he can come in, you know, he's one of your mates, you know."
I came across recently the great Van Dyke Parks, you know, the arranger, and you know, the guy who read Heroes and Villains with Rivals. So Van Dyke Parks is whatever he is, he's 70 or something like that. And if you interview Van Dyke Parks, he enters the room like it's the first interview he's ever done in his life.
Fabulous.
And it'll probably be the last one he ever does in his life. and it's a complete show. He doesn't stop at all.
Wow.
If there are any ladies in the room, he will kiss their hands. And at the end of the interview, he'll hand you a business card saying, Van Dyke Parks would like to sincerely apologise for any trouble he's been. And I just thought, what an object lesson of everything.
Yeah.
Somebody prepared to approach it like that, you know,
Yeah.
which is what I'd like to see from everybody, but it's clearly not going to happen.
They should hand that out to estate agents.
Yes. So that's my second point. If you don't want to do press,
Okay.
don't do it.
Yeah, and
And you'd agree?
Well, if it was as simple as that, yes. But I think the pressures of being, because in a way, one is in a way an